There is much to talk about. Let's get right to our panel. Joining us from Tel Aviv is Ruthie Blum. She's a columnist for Jewish News, Syndicate, and Jerusalem Post. Debra Shushan is the director for policy and government relations at Americans for Peace Now, right here in Washington, D.C. And journalist Tammi Molad Hayo is also a social and cultural activist, and she joins us from Jerusalem. Also from Jerusalem is pollster and political analyst Mitchell Barak. Mitchell, I want to start with you. Let's look at the timing of this announcement and also the fact 39 days before the election, the Attorney General Avichai Mendelblit served in Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet. I want you to listen to what the Prime Minister had to say about these allegations and pending indictments.
They applied bullying, unceasing, and I would say almost inhuman pressure on the Attorney General, so that he would say he is considering laying charges against me, subject to a hearing, even though it is clear that there is no substance. The main thing was to influence the elections, even if they know that this house of cards will completely collapse after the elections.
Let's talk about his words. What about this house of cards? Could it collapse? And what is your take on this moving forward?
Highly unlikely, I think, that it will collapse, and I think that the Prime Minister is acting like a crybaby. These investigations have been going on a number of years already. The elections in Israel were supposed to be held in November according to law. The Prime Minister moved them up. There was sort of a chess game going on to see maybe he could move it up and then get the Attorney General to wait till after the election. The Attorney General decided not to take his challenge and issue it now because the Attorney General says the people have a right to know what are the charges against them. I think it's very bad for a Prime Minister to attack the Attorney General, the police, the court system, and he's actually acting like a crybaby.
Ruthie, I want to bring you in. What is your reaction to this? And also, Benjamin Netanyahu's chief rival at this point, Benny Gantz, very slight lead over the Prime Minister. However, another survey, this one from the Times of Israel, shows that if Netanyahu faces charges, that the ruling Likud party could lose its grip on power and make it difficult for them to form a coalition after the election.
Well, first of all, there has not been an indictment, so this dramatic announcement, so-called dramatic announcement, actually means nothing at the moment. As Mitchell said, these investigations have been going on for years, and even if the elections were held in November, the Attorney General will not by then have yet written an indictment if he plans to do so after the hearings. He himself said that it could take an entire year before the hearings take place and charges are brought. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think the charges are totally trumped up whenever they're brought. So whether there's a house of cards or there isn't, there is clear politicization going on here.
Tammi, if I can get you to weigh in on this, where we stand now. And I also want you to talk more about Gantz. He's a political newcomer, but he does have a fine reputation, but he's someone who has not been in the fray, so to speak. Your thoughts on Gantz moving forward and what Netanyahu could potentially be facing?
Well, to start with, in the months to come, Netanyahu is going to face actually nothing except a little bit of bad press and, well, and a lot of sympathy from his followers. So in that sense, with the coming election, he didn't lose anything. If we're talking about Gantz and the new political venture that he's heading, it's a very interesting party, the party that he's giving to the public. He's talking about security. He's talking about being different politicians who come out from outside the political arena. But he's actually not saying anything about economics or about the social situation in Israel. And these are the two most important things for the everyday life for the Israelis. And since no one is talking about it, there are only two things that these elections are on. One is whether Netanyahu is right. And we have a corrupt legal system, corrupt journalistic system. And the other is about security.
Also, though, let's talk in real terms about what Netanyahu could possibly face. If convicted, he could face 10 years, and it's the first time that a sitting prime minister would face something such as this. And he is also pushing back as much as he can, saying, look, this is the 4th consecutive term that he could be going for, and says that these are just trumped up charges. I want to hear a little bit more from the Prime Minister.
The left knows that with such achievements they cannot beat us at the polling booth. So for the past 3 years they have been carrying out a political persecution against us, an unprecedented witch hunt, which has one aim: to topple the right-wing government which I lead, and to put in the leftist government of Lapid and Gantz.
Your thoughts on that? Is this a political witch hunt?
Of course, it's not a witch hunt. It's, you know, if his hands are clean, then he will be able to prove it. But for years, he's been doing everything possibly humanly possible just to stop and to delay the whole process. So what do you expect? At the end of the day, he is facing 3 very grave charges. And let's say the truth, we already had one prime minister sitting in jail. We had a president in jail. And I cannot believe that this is how I have to protect the legal system of Israel, saying that we have so many corrupt politicians that he's not the first one and probably will not be the last one.
Debra, here in the U.S., terms like political witch hunt, persecution, it sounds a little familiar. It sounds like somebody else. Let's talk about the relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And is Netanyahu taking a page out of Trump's book?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad that you raised this parallel, Sean. You could say that Netanyahu is taking a page out of Trump's book. You could also say that Trump has learned a lot about Bibi Netanyahu from Bibi Netanyahu. And let's keep in mind that it's Netanyahu who's been at this game much longer than Trump has. And the parallels that we do see between the two are startling in terms of, frankly, the gaslighting that we see of respective publics here in the United States and Israel by elected officials, but with Netanyahu and Trump attacking political opponents, attacking the media. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, constantly attacking the left. You know, we're in a situation where, unfortunately, the left has been tremendously weakened, and yet he has to try to build it up to portray it as this profound enemy that's trying to tear him down, which frankly is completely ridiculous. And of course, the other party beyond the media and the left that we haven't mentioned so far that Netanyahu is attacking would be Israel's Palestinian citizens, 20 to 25% of the population, against whom he has mounted disgusting racist attacks in order to mobilize his right-wing base and those even further to the right of him to try to maintain their support and ensure that they will stay with him even if and even when he is actually indicted. And there are some developments along those lines that we might want to bring in as well that are late-breaking.
Exactly. One of the right-wing members of Parliament has, lawmakers has reached out and said he wants to push a measure through that would make it illegal to prosecute Netanyahu while he is in office. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's just spell this out a little bit. So the lawmaker in question is Bezalel Smotrich of the United Right Party. This is the political party that Benjamin Netanyahu bent over backwards in order to make sure that they would make their way into the Knesset, going so far as to engineer a merger between them and Otzma Yehudit, an ultra-right-wing party led by Kahanists, to make sure that they stay in Knesset, knowing that they would remain loyal to him, even if, and again, even when the actual indictment goes through. And so the fact that it is Smotrich who now is introducing this so-called French law to shield Netanyahu against indictment, to make sure that he, as a sitting prime minister, cannot be indicted and cannot face trial, is extremely telling as far as what's developing now between Netanyahu and the ultra-right wing.
Ruthie, I want to bring you in on this because this so-called French law has been talked about for some time. Your thoughts on if this is going to move forward, and is it just going to be a fail-safe for the Prime Minister?
I don't know if it's going to move forward, but I have always been a supporter of that law. Well, before, actually, Debra mentioned former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who served jail time. He resigned before he was convicted and went to jail. But even Olmert, whose politics I completely disagreed with, I did not think he should have been prosecuted while he was prime minister. I didn't think he should have had to waste his time on lawyers and all this other stuff while he was running the country. And that it was a political rival of mine. And so I certainly feel that way about Netanyahu, whom I support.
Mitchell, let's talk about that. What's wrong with following up charges against a publicly elected official? And let's talk about Netanyahu, the way he is portraying himself now with billboards around Israel. He's a man in a league of his own who stood up to Barack Obama when Barack Obama wanted to push through the Iran nuclear deal, and now says that he worked with Donald Trump as the U.S. is opting out of that measure, and also saying that he's someone who can deal with Vladimir Putin and allowed Israel to launch strikes against Syria. How does that play in Israel right now?
Well, first of all, there is a difference, meaning between Olmert and Netanyahu in the indictment. When Olmert was indicted, or the Attorney General recommended an indictment for Olmert, it was for the time when he was mayor. Okay, it wasn't even, it was before he was prime minister. Every single one of these cases, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000, all have to do with when he was prime minister this time around in this past decade, and had to do with trading favors. One of them is bribery. One of them is not dealing honestly. And so these are charges that, you know, he's had while prime minister. So, you know, in this case, if he continues to be prime minister, what's going to stop him to still operate that way? Meaning he's still saying he did nothing wrong. Regarding the case also, I think there's some pretty solid evidence here, because they have state witnesses on each of these cases who were very close to Netanyahu. His top advisors in each of these cases have all turned state evidence and state witness. There's telephone recordings, there's meeting recordings, there's documentation. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be very difficult for Netanyahu to disprove. So Netanyahu is convinced, first of all, that he's a victim, but also Netanyahu is convinced that the greater good of the state of Israel and the people of Israel rests firmly on his shoulders. And he is the only guy that can protect the state of Israel, whether it's the Iranian threat, whether it's the threat from the north, from Syria, whether it's a threat from Gaza, whether it's the Palestinians in the West Bank, whether it's terror. And he's the only one, and he's unique in that he's one of the few leaders in the world that deals very well and has an excellent relationship with Donald Trump on the one hand, and one of the few leaders in the world that has an excellent working relationship with Vladimir Putin, and he's probably the only one in the world that can say he has both. So Israelis are very geopolitically connected. They are very aware of what's going on in the world. Israel is a small country surrounded by basically hostility, and Israelis see the geopolitical and the world arena. And for that, Netanyahu, there's not a lot of people in Israel that are on his level, let alone the rest of the world.
Tammi, I want to talk about Israel on the global stage, if you will. There hasn't been any movement for years now in the Israel-Palestinian situation, but we do hear that Jared Kushner, of course Donald Trump's son-in-law and one of his chief advisors, has a new plan out to bring peace to that area. How would it play out if indeed there was a new prime minister, and how much pushback do you think Netanyahu is going to give any plan that Kushner comes up with?
Well, first of all, I have to say that we've been hearing about this mysterious plan for over a year now, promised to be published in the next few weeks, next few months, so we'll have to see. But the other thing is we have to know to really look at the political arena in Israel. Will Netanyahu be able to acknowledge such a plan, or to do anything towards the Palestinians, to give them something? And in the political arena to date in Israel, I doubt it very much. He will probably be prime minister after this election, because his followers will still vote for him, and we know that there are too many political parties in Israel that for them it doesn't really matter who is the prime minister, as long as they get what they want. And that exactly is the problem. If he's going to have a coalition of 61 out of 120, that means that he will have to pay a lot of favors to the other parties. And most of these parties, especially from the right wing, like Bezalel Smotrich, which Ruthie just spoke of, and his new friends from the Kahana, the racist right wing Jewish party, then how will Netanyahu exactly be able to do anything in the Israeli-Palestinian arena? He will not be able to do anything. In a way, if you look at the past 10 years, I think that his greatest achievement is doing nothing, is always talking about that when there will be a plan, whenever there will be a chance, he's the only one who can bring the peace, he's the only one who can do anything, but he has done nothing except putting a lot of effort into doing absolutely nothing. The problem is that while politicians have all the reasons not to do anything, the people on the ground, Palestinians in Gaza, the Israelis in the south, Israelis in the north, what's happening in Syria, they don't have much more time. They don't have the patience anymore. So whether the politicians want to do something or not, it's all going to blow up in our faces, I'm afraid.
Debra, I want to bring you in because you had a couple of chuckles during that information from Tammi, but let's also look at the fact that even though the Attorney General has not made a decision to move forward. Let's presume that he does for a minute. How difficult is it going to be for Netanyahu to get anything done if he's going to be fighting these allegations, these charges? How can he move that nation forward? And it's always in such a precarious position in virtually every landscape you can think of.
I don't think that the situation would change dramatically from what it has been, in the sense that Netanyahu has already been, before the announcement that came from the Attorney General, he's been fighting against the Attorney General, against the police in terms of their decision to recommend that he be indicted. It might take a little bit more of his time now that his attorneys are preparing for this hearing. I don't think there will be a dramatic change. I think what Tammi pointed to, which is the fact that if Netanyahu does succeed in becoming prime minister again, he is likely to have a much more razor-thin majority. It looks like now it would be something like 61 seats, just the bare majority out of 120. And so, as Tammi indicated, he's going to have to hand out a lot more favors to ultra-right-wing parties. One of the things that I would really look at in that regard, and that I'm very concerned about, is that we'll go from the status quo where Netanyahu has allowed this process of creeping annexation of the West Bank to move forward, that now, in order to maintain, in order to hand the ultra-right-wing parties what they want, the Naftali Bennett's that will be part of the coalition, he may actually have to go ahead and push for full annexation either of the West Bank in its entirety in terms of extending sovereignty, or at least of Area C of the West Bank. And that's not something that the Trump administration, by the way, going back to what you asked about vis-a-vis the Kushner plan, has shown any indication that they're going to push back on. So we're in a very dangerous situation, particularly in terms of the situation between Israel and the Palestinians.
Ruthie, I'd like you to weigh in on the geopolitical changes that could be possible.
Okay, first of all, to say that Netanyahu has done nothing is ridiculous. Netanyahu, realizing that the Palestinians are not going to agree to any kind of deal, as Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas said, I am not going to go down in history as a traitor to my people, and he said he will not do any dealings with the Trump administration. Having realized that, Netanyahu engaged in a brilliant policy of forging relations with Arab neighbors all over the Middle East and other countries. In fact, it is a policy, and it's a policy that understands that the Palestinian issue is not the central issue in the Middle East. Netanyahu understands that Iran is the biggest danger, not the Palestinian-Israel conflict, and also that Israel needs more friends and allies in the region, and that is what he has been forging. And therefore, I do not see us in a precarious position, and I'm happy to see that my fellow panelists seem to believe that Netanyahu is going to be the next prime minister, in spite of the fact that most of the anti-Netanyahu camp has been saying that Gantz has a serious chance of forming the next government.
Mitchell, let's talk about these charges specifically that Netanyahu is possibly facing. Accepting $300,000 worth of champagne and cigars and gifts from one of Netanyahu's billionaire friends. But perhaps the most serious charge, allegedly promoting regulatory changes that would go to benefit a friend of his, a telecom giant. And only 35%, a new poll shows only 35% of Israelis agree with the statement, the investigations into Benjamin Netanyahu are petty and politically motivated. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, Israelis see the big picture here. So they're looking at, you know, economically the country's doing well. We have a lot of innovation going on. You know, the Happy Nation Index came out. Israel was one of the top 10 countries, I think number 8. People are eating well and living well here. It's not that nobody is struggling, but we are a very innovative country, and countries all over the world are coming here to see how we do what we do and how we're so advanced technologically. And as Ruthie said, you know, the Prime Minister has opened up new relations with many, many Arab countries, also strengthened relations with many, many European countries. So Israel is not as isolated as people would like to think. I think that, you know, it's not, whereas there has been no or little progress in the peace process, no one has even mentioned that the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, still supports terrorists and terrorist families, meaning the biggest expenditure every month is to pay people who have killed Israeli citizens and Jews in this region. And it's really hard to talk about moving forward in peaceful coexistence when on your payroll are people that have killed citizens from this country.
I have about 30 seconds for each of you, and I want you to answer one final question. Mitchell, I'll start with you. How do you see this playing out, and give me your forecast?
My forecast is it is a wide open race right now, and anyone can win it and everyone can lose it. It is too early to tell because there are two things that are going to happen. One is if Gantz, Lapid, they have to pry away people from the right bloc over to the left bloc for voting, but then the question is going to be who has more seats? Is it the Likud or is it the Gantz, Lapid? And if it is Gantz, Lapid, can they pull away some of those traditional right-of-center partners like the religious parties, the ultra-religious parties? Can they get them to move, and possibly the Russian party, can they get them to move over to join them?
Okay.
And then they will be able to form the next government. And also, if Netanyahu doesn't do as well as he thinks, then I think the Likud will finish with him, and they'll move on to a new leadership contest.
Ruthie?
Too early to tell. We'll have to wait till April 10th.
Okay, Ruthie, about 30 seconds. Give me your best estimate.
I agree with Mitchell that it's too early to tell in this country. Everything moves so quickly, but I predict that on election day what's going to happen is similar to what happened in 2009 when Tzipi Livni's party won more seats than the Likud but was unable to form a coalition, and Netanyahu succeeded in doing so. I have a feeling that something like that is going to happen.
Interesting. And Tammy, once again, if I can get your reaction?
It's not too early. We know that whether it's going to be Netanyahu as prime minister or Netanyahu as prime minister at the end of this election, it doesn't really matter. The big question is whether we're going to deal with the real big picture. Iran on our northern border, Hamas on our southern border. We are first in the Western world in poverty. We have so many difficulties and problems. The big question about these elections is what's going to happen not in 1 month's time, what's going to happen in 1 year time.
Debra, very thoughtful, thought-provoking answers. Let me hear your thoughts moving forward.
So, I mean, the one existential threat that faces Israel, as has been, as top Israel security brass have said, is the ongoing conflict with the Palestinians in terms of Israel's future as a national homeland for the Jewish people and also as a liberal democracy. We'll see what's going to happen. I think I agree with the fellow guest that it's up in the air, but one thing that I think folks should look at, should keep in mind, is that in just a few weeks, Bibi Netanyahu is coming to Washington. He's going to speak at the AIPAC policy conference, as he did in 2015, 2 years before the last Israeli election. He's going to meet with his good friend Donald Trump, who's going to, they're going to have some nice photo ops. Yeah. Exact public embrace, and try to perhaps deliver something in terms of the trip that Kushner just made to the Gulf, if he can lay a nice prize at Netanyahu's table. So Netanyahu still has some things up his sleeve. AIPAC will certainly help him with that, and so it's not over before it's over.
Debra and all our panelists, I want to thank you very much. That does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C., and as always, thanks for being with us, everyone.